Hello and welcome to Let's Review. The Serious Sam franchise has actually been around for a little while now. The original game was designed as a callback to the Doom era of shooters. And now BFE comes along and it's designed as a callback to that first Serious Sam, which makes it a callback to a callback. Oh well, at least they're calling back to something fun, I suppose. Ultimately, that makes my job as a reviewer relatively simple. Does it do a good job of calling up the original formula? And does that original formula actually hold up? Well, to answer that, we start the same place we always do, with the gameplay. If you've ever played an old school shooter, you should know what to expect here. Just you, hundreds of enemies, and more guns than you could ever reasonably carry.
This is an example of a mission that's about 2/3 of the way through the game, so by this point I have a significant number of weapons unlocked. As you can see, the levels are reasonably well designed, quite nice and open. Now, unlike a lot of modern shooters, you do not regenerate your health. As you can see in the bottom left corner of the screen, you have an armor reading and a health reading, so here I have some body armor. However, I cannot pick it up because my body armor is over 100. Now it actually goes as high as 200, but only certain pickups will allow you to get it over the 100 mark. The same goes for my health. So, to demonstrate the combat, and it does auto-save occasionally, just like that. So here we have a standard enemy, and that basically happens when you shoot them. It's the kind of thing you would expect, really. You have a number of weapons at your availability, so for example, if you fancy going melee, smack them with a sledgehammer. So partway through the game you also unlock this energy leash, which causes them to explode. You can also do straight up melee attacks like that. Now these basic grade enemies are not very tough. They go down in a couple of shots even from the basic grade pistol. There are of course significantly stronger enemies, as well as those that are actually only vulnerable to heavier grade weapons. Switching between weapons can be done with either the mouse wheel or the number keys. Ammunition, and some more armor, which again I can't use at the moment. The various pickups are all highlighted at range in different colours, so armor pickups are blue, health pickups are red, ammunition is yellow, weapons are green, and special items such as keys are purple. Now the melee strikes that I am often given the option to use will be instant kills on anything you use them on, however certain enemies are only vulnerable to them at certain times, and you have to be relatively close in order to use them, which is not always easy to achieve, especially when there are extremely large numbers of enemies. The levels are deliberately a little maze-like at times, but do contain secret areas that let you find hidden objects, such as extra ammo, extra health, and other such things. Some of these are actually officially classified as secrets, and you will be informed when you find them. At the end of each level there's a score system determined by how many of the enemies you killed, how quickly you completed the level, how many of the secrets you found, and etc. And at the end of the day, that's it for the primary combat. A lot of it involves dodging around charging enemies and various other things such as that. And with some weapons, i.e. the assault rifle and the pistol, you can aim down the sights. The other weapons do not allow for this. That over there is one of the larger enemies who will fire rockets at you. Now those rockets can actually be shot out of the sky before they reach you. Using the grenade launcher I was able to take him down without many problems. A lot of the enemies do like to charge you, such as these guys, and avoiding them while taking out some of the more dangerous ranged enemies is one part of the gameplay. Now, most of the ranged enemies don't do that much damage, however things like the Robo-Scorpions do, which as you can see my health and armour have degraded significantly. And fundamentally, that is it for the gameplay. I'll just demonstrate one more melee kill, and you'll notice that you are not invulnerable during the melee kills. Things like those Robo-Scorpions can do an awful lot of damage at range, though. Why getting attacked by several of them makes for an interesting challenge. And fundamentally, that's it for the gameplay.
The things that BFE does well, it does do very well indeed. During the missions that make up the central sections of the campaign, you will have a lot of fun dodging around the charging enemies, taking aim and carefully taking out the bomber enemies before they become a problem, and dealing with some of the heavier enemies, as well as mowing down all the smaller goons at close range, because they're barely a threat. The problem is that while Serious Sam does a lot of stuff very well, it also falls flat in other areas, particularly the sections where you have to operate inside dark buildings.
During the sections set inside buildings, you will be reliant on your torch in order to see what is going on. And as you can see here, the cone of light that it displays is very, very small, making seeing anything on the edges of your vision extremely difficult. This situation gets worse if, like me, you have turned the field of view slider up significantly. These sections tend not to have a significant amount of combat, usually only smaller enemies such as the leaping monkey things, and occasionally some of the mid-level charging enemies such as the skeletons. This is for the best, as combat inside these areas is obnoxious, to say the least. The extremely limited sight range makes it difficult to tell where you're being attacked from, and makes combating the enemies in here annoying.
Sam moves noticeably slower indoors, and for a game that's all about quick movement and dodging, that's a problem. Particularly given that the smaller level design makes it harder to dodge the charging enemies when they come at you, which is the only really effective way to fight them. In addition, I have two other main problems with the game. And the first of those is the weapons. They're just not very interesting, and there frankly are not enough of them.
The final weapon selection in the game is the sledgehammer, your basic fists, the cannon, which is at least reasonably interesting, the devastator, which I cannot show you at the moment because I'm out of ammunition for it, the rocket launcher, the minigun, the assault rifle, and two shotguns, along with a basic red pistol. And honestly, the big problem with these is they're just kind of generic. For a game like Serious Sam, you would expect much more variation in the weapons, and while the cannon is certainly an interesting and amusing weapon, nothing else here is. It's all the kind of stuff that we've seen 100 times before in 100 other games. And ultimately, it's just a letdown.
I also dislike the fact that the weapons lack any secondary fire modes, bar the odd aim down sight. I want to know why the hell this has gone out of our first-person shooters. It makes the weapons more interesting. I mean, the assault rifle could have an underbarrel grenade launcher, the shotgun a mode that fires several shells at once. And why in the hell does the energy whip not have a mode that allows you to lasso an enemy and throw him into his mates? That would make dealing with the bomb guys much more interesting, as you could grab one and hurl it into a cluster of the enemies. It's a waste of potential, and we haven't even got onto this game's biggest problem yet, and that's its final level.
During the final level, you're brought into this canyon, and you must fight your way through it to reach the final boss. And the problem is that it spawns consistent waves of enemies in small groups. Well, small to medium-sized groups, I should say. And they don't stop coming. There are an approximate 1,700 enemies on this level. And that, frankly, is too many for the size of the map it gives you to fight in. It leaves you with very little feeling of forward momentum, as you often have to backtrack in order to withstand the charge of the incoming enemies.
Would you consider attacking one at a time?
This is particularly evident later on when it begins throwing things like the charging skeletons at you, who are deadly at close range. As a result, the final level is not particularly satisfying, as the waves of enemies that it throws at you start to become extremely irritating extremely quickly.
The final level is a pure slog, and it lacks the open feeling of the levels that came before. The enemies spawn in medium-sized groups and just keep on appearing constantly until you've mowed your way through insane numbers of them. And it's not even the insane numbers of before that were fun to fight. It reaches a level of oversaturation that just makes them boring. Ultimately, by the time I was halfway through the final level, I wanted to stop playing because it had stopped being fun. And frankly, it's got another problem as well, and that's the final boss.
While it does both look spectacular and provide you with a jetpack, this final fight is just disappointing, as it's not so much a fight as it is a terrible puzzle in which you've got to stab the boss in the back with poles while he's looking away from you. It's not as epic as it should be, and it doesn't make you feel like the incredible monster killer that you want to be. Overall, it's just a very weak way to end the game.
Overall, the gameplay of Serious Sam BFE is very, very mixed. It does do some things extremely well, and you can have a lot of fun with it, especially during the game's excellent mid-section. Unfortunately, by the end, it's just a slog and it becomes boring to play. So, if the gameplay is quite flawed, how well does the story fare? Serious Sam BFE is a prequel to the original Serious Sam that deals with Sam battling through Egypt in an attempt to reach the Time Lock, an ancient time travel device that will in some way help prevent the destruction of the human race. And honestly, that's kind of it for the plot. It's 12 missions that ultimately lead to the Time Lock, and that's kind of the problem with prequels. You know how they have to end. And narratively speaking, there's just not very much to BFE. Are there at least interesting characters? Oh, I'm sorry, you're serious, aren't you? Was the overacting strictly necessary? Always, yeah. Look, here's the thing. The characters are basically completely and utterly pointless. Here's the thing, there's a couple of helicopter pilots, a woman who talks in your ear for most of the game, and a guy who gets killed quite literally within 2 minutes of being introduced. And honestly, Sam cares about his death about as much as we do, to the point where I'm actually pretty certain that Sam would be considered a psychopath. I'm deadly serious here. He shows no compassion at all for anyone who dies. He has no worries at all about the literal thousands of beings that he's murdered. And he doesn't even seem to care particularly strongly about the destruction of the entire human race. Perhaps he is simply suppressing his emotions as a way of dealing with the horror of the situation. Yeah, or he's just written as a parody of over-the-top action heroes and thus doesn't have any emotion at all. The problem with that style is that honestly I can't tell whether they did it on purpose or not, and either way it just comes across as a little creepy to me. Sam has a few good one-liners, but for the most part he does not do anything for me as a character. The story of BFE is so pointless as to barely be worth mentioning, and honestly that's all there is that's worth saying about it. I have to give praise for a lot of the creature designs in this game. They are really, really impressive. I have a particular fondness for the Robo-Scorpions and the Charging Skeletons. And let's be honest about this, the final boss is spectacular. Unfortunately, I can't be as complimentary about the environment design. Because you spend the entire game in Egypt, your backdrops will start to get quite boring quite quickly. It would have been nice to see a more globe-trotting element to allow for a lot more variation. Imagine thousands of enemies sweeping towards you across a grassy plain, or a futuristic high-rise city with tall buildings all around that you can run around and explore. And frankly, if Wolfenstein can take us to the moon, why can't Serious Sam at least let us board an alien ship? The graphics are pretty good overall. There's some nice texture work, there's some really good smoke effects, and honestly, I didn't notice any real bugs or glitches, which is a plus. Technically speaking, it managed to stay above 60 frames per second solidly, even when the numbers of enemies on screen was completely ridiculous, and that I think is a very important factor in a game like this. I'm going to start with the bad in this section. The gun sound effects are terrible. They are too quiet, too weedy, and they make the guns feel pathetic, especially things like the shotguns, and the rocket launcher doesn't fare much better either. In contrast to that, the music is absolutely fantastic. As someone who goes through a metal phase once in a while, I really, really love the soundtrack for this game. I'm actually seriously considering buying the OST. Honestly, the music is probably the best thing about this game. Well, at the very least, it's my favourite aspect of it. So, did I enjoy Serious Sam BFE? Well, kind of. Should you buy it? I can't recommend this one to you at full price. For everything it does well, it also does something really, really badly, and it's too mixed to justify a full price release. That being said, if you can pick it up on a sale, it's probably worth it, for the bits that are genuinely really good fun. If it's anything between about 5 and 10 quid, it's probably worth giving a go. Now, if you'll excuse me, I feel like booting up the soundtrack for this game and playing it at a volume that'll probably deafen me for a couple of days. I will see you later.